Agents seems to be the word of the day.
Yeah.
Maybe the word of the year. I think we're kind of in this phase of the AI cycle where we started off with copilots. People just got used to interfacing with ChatGPT, different prompt styles and all that. But agents is kind of at least evolution forward. How have you, Anna Marie, Shelby, have approached this topic or this subject of agents? Is it a new paradigm? Is it more of the same? How do you answer that?
Well, I would definitely say it's new. I think it's a step function forward, evolution-wise. So I'm Anna Marie, head of Zapier Central, which is a product created at Zapier for taking advantage of the 7,000 plus apps that we integrate with and taking action in those apps using your AI agent. So your question is how do we think about taking advantage of this evolution in the ecosystem? And this is definitely something we started thinking about really kind of as soon as ChatGPT was launched, and even really before that. Oh, it's so funny, it says head of product. I am not head of product at Zapier. I am head of Zapier Central. So when you think about agents operating on your behalf, obviously Zapier is all about operating on your behalf in other tools. That's kind of the point of the product of Zapier. And so agents are really just kind of reduplication of yourself. And then Zapier then leverages that across a wide plethora of opportunities. So when I think about agents, I think about how do you model what the human wants to do, and how do you kind of offload some of that reasoning and some of that cognitive effort into an LLM-based system. And then what can that LLM-based system then do? There's lots of drawbacks, lots of problems, lots of struggles. But there's also tons of opportunity when you can take advantage of that kind of offload of cognition. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I love that. And so, I mean, one way I like to think about it is, in the past 2 years, we've been focusing on content generation, text generation. We see lots of products that are around, generate this text for me, then generate this website for me, and that is all fantastic and super high value. But now we're at the stage where we want more out of our AI. We want it to do even more complex tasks, as you were saying. So now we want to be able to ask for even more ambiguous tasks, like help me analyze my top leads and send the right pitch emails. It requires calling that LLM multiple times to make a plan and to execute every step of the plan. So these agents, it's like we're calling the LLM over and over again to do the thinking and to do the execution.
Absolutely. And the other thing is we're kind of democratizing the ability to create these systems. So when you think about what it takes to create a system of automation that can operate on your behalf, not agentic, but just automation, you need to be able to think very procedurally. And that's a skill. That's a skill. So there's technical thinking, there's technical capability, and then there's procedural thinking and procedural capability. And that's why you have tech parts of the org and you have ops parts of the org. And so being able to describe a procedure that you want a system to follow is a skill set. And when you enter the world of agents, you lower that barrier to entry because the agent itself can interpolate a procedure out of ambiguous instructions or less procedural instructions. And so you really kind of open up that opportunity for a wide plethora of people who maybe aren't thinking about paths and exactly how everything's going to flow and different edge cases and things like that. They can describe a general outcome they want and leave it up to the agent to do the procedural thinking.
Yeah. So as part of getting towards this future, there's a lot of building that has happened.
Yeah.
And I think, Shelby, you in particular, through your team and your research groups, you've built several open source projects and even released several models. One is Agent Light, I believe. It's a framework for building kind of single or multi-agent architectures, as well as Tiny Giant.
Yes. So I actually want to dive into Tiny Giant because it's exactly what you were talking about. So Anna Marie was just saying that it's about this ability to create procedures. The LLM needs to create procedures in order to, implement this agentic workflow. And so what we've been working on is training a suite of function calling models. So many of you here may have heard of this. It's a model that you give it an ask, like, I want to know the weather for today. and that it outputs the exact actions you need to take, whether it's calling the weather app, whether it's navigating some website. It can produce the exact steps to take. So that's what function calling is. It can call functions, it can call APIs. So we've been really focusing on training models that are outstanding at this. And so one of the models that we trained, as he was mentioning, is called Tiny Giant. And it's called Tiny Giant for a reason. It is only a 1B model, only 1 billion parameters. And because it's only 1 billion parameters, it's super fast. It can fit across devices. It could fit on a mobile device. It could fit on a server. Super, super fast, super trained for function calling. And so actually, it's on the Berkeley function calling leaderboard, this well-known, completely public leaderboard, beating models more than 10 times its size. So we're really excited about Tiny Giant. And yeah, I think this function calling is the heart of getting an agentic workflow going.
Yeah, and just even adding to that, there's a notion of you want to call functions or tools.
Yeah.
And Zapier has actually, for a long while, been in this space of automation and actually kind of providing integrations between different software platforms, whether they be consumer or enterprise. Can you speak about where does Zapier fit in and even building this platform for agent builders?
Totally. Yeah, so calling tools, one of the things that's really interesting is the more tools you give an agent to pick from, the less accurate it's going to be at picking the right one. Zapier has over 7,000 tools that you can call. That is an untenable number to give an agent. So I think a lot about where you bring the UI in to help the user meet the agent with what the agent can do. It's amazing how much magic end users expect from these models because they can do some things that just seem so magical. So I think a lot about how do we give the user the ability to constrain, from these 7,000, I'm interested in these 12 in this moment, and kind of create different agents that might have different slices of what's possible. And then I also think about, we start layering agents on agents, and we have, a planning agent that gets called that then picks the right tool and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff built in around that, and you can lean into building layers of agents, and you can also lean into building layers of UI to help the user kind of help the agent navigate what they're looking to do. But that's one of the classic problems. Great, we have 7,000 things you can do. That's a lot to choose from.
Yeah.
I think you made a great point that one agent is not a jack of all trades. Imagine giving one agent, asking an agent to pick out of all 7,000, like you said, the accuracy would just go down. And so I think one of the ways we're coming around to getting better at this is really, as you were saying, building a multi-agent system, not just one agent, but a system of multiple agents. So you probably heard about that today, but that is definitely another emerging area. We're figuring out how to get agents to communicate to each other, how to get them to work together, because we found that by distributing the work, the accuracy goes up. If we can have an agent that's specialized at one thing and have a bunch of them that are specialized at one thing, they all work together better.
And isn't that very similar to how we kind of construct our current, human organizations? And
exactly.
where I'm not the expert in everything. I certainly need to learn to delegate more probably, but that there are other people on my teams and other groups that, just are experts at what they do. And I can rely on them. I can function call my way over to them to just help achieve more, right?
Exactly, and I think it's also, we already see this in the software engineering world with microservices architecture. I think, with the microservices architecture, you have specialized services connected, and it makes it easier to maintain. They're really specialized, easier to control. I think we're just seeing the same maturity come to agents now.
And the thing I find so exciting about that is, you're right, for millennia, we've been architecting human systems, agent to agent, human agent to human agent, with natural language as that interface and that API. And so now that we are applying natural language often as the interface of human to agent and human to agent to agent to agent, it's much more intuitive. And I think the gap that you have to cross as a user to get into this architecture is very low.
Yeah. Well, kudos to Salesforce, kudos to Zapier for building a lot of the bits that allow us to build these sort of agents. Let's take a step back and start thinking about as agents are positioned to do more things and you put more expectations toward their capabilities and how autonomous they are, what are the implications for how they interact with us in the modern workplace?
Well, a bunch of implications. There's a lot of accuracy implications. If every time an agent makes a choice, if it's 90% accurate and you ask it to make 10 choices, it's gonna fail 60, 70% of the time overall, right? Which is not a level of reliability that any business can, support. So I think some of the implications are people are starting in actual applications are starting with either human in the loop as the outcome. Like the outcome is draft an email. Don't send the email, draft it, and I'll look at it. Or they are kind of internal use cases only, internal to a person or internal to an organization, where the risk of something going poorly is much lower risk. And so if you get something that's like a faux pas that's sent as a direct message to yourself, doesn't really matter. Sent as a direct message to your boss, less great. Sent as an email to your customer, so people are, constraining what they're allowing their agents to do as they're kind of gaining more and more trust. And I think we're going to see that for a while. We're going to see that, especially external-facing activities that you let your agent do are going to be human-in-the-loop verified for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we're definitely at this point right now where we're not letting agents out in the wild, right? We're definitely keeping them very constrained. I think we're coming up with ways to make them more reliable. I think these are all problems that we totally can solve over the next 5 years. They're doable. I think one thing, there's guardrails you can always build around your agents to improve reliability and improve trust. But one thing I want to mention is I want to go back to the fine tuning. That's something that we really have been focusing on. With fine tuning, we can really train our agents to know how to write great procedures. So I think fine tuning just has a lot of potential for the future.
When you think about this evolution of Copilot to even just, let's say, an asynchronous agent that can go off and do some work for you, as opposed to you having to be, you can call it babysitting it and monitoring it every single second. What type of actual new work could be done? Or what type of superpowers can an individual now have with these empowered agents by their side?
I love that question. So it's interesting because there's a class of superpower that is possible but not financially viable. So an example is you could have a Zapier central assistant monitor your entire Slack instance, every single message that comes in, evaluate whether or not they think you'll find it important based on a set of criteria you've given it, or a job description, or just kind of your musings about what you find interesting in life, maybe your Medium posts. And then the agent can review everything as it's coming in and be like, oh, that one's important, that one's important, that one's important, and either send you notifications, add them to a sheet, whatever. You could totally do that. But it's also going to be making thousands and thousands of LLM calls for every single day, which is just not financially viable. And so I think it's interesting because there's the new class of awareness that you can build these agents to be your awareness that we don't have the attention for, because there's so much more parallelization in an agent, obviously. But currently, that's not financially viable. I'm kind of excited about when it becomes in the realm of things that people can afford based on model costs going down, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I will just add to that. I just see that, when we have agents that can, work autonomously on our behalf, when we get there soon, I think, we'll be able to achieve tasks 24/7. I think that is really one of the biggest takeaways, that you won't need to be there to monitor as much, and you'll be able to get things done all times of the day. So I think that's one of the biggest bonuses.
Yeah, I think right now, we're seeing a lot of customers using Central to automatically reply to questions based on knowledge about an FAQ or something like that. So email comes in, draft a reply based on some FAQ knowledge that it has. We're still seeing people use it to draft. So there's still kind of that leash, on the agent. And so that to me is not categorically new work. It's just faster of what you would already be doing. It frees up a little bit of your time. But I do think that there are interesting categories, the awareness one being one, of just there's so much you could do if you could parallelize yourself. That's not just do what you already do faster. It's like do net new things. So I think that's going to be really interesting to find, but those use cases are going to rely on model costs going down a lot. Right now, most of the like in production, real business critical use cases that people are using agents for at Zapier are things that save them time of things they're already doing.
You mentioned model costs being one of the things to be aware of. I'm sure a lot of people in the room are also considering the next evolution of models that are coming out, and probably like decent speculation on what the next, fruit-flavored version of these models could be. But Shelby, do you have any sort of commentary on like what do the models need to do in order for a more agentic future to be realized?
Yeah, so let's talk about costs. I think we're headed into a future where we're going to be leveraging smaller models. Big models will always have their place. They're amazing, right? We all love them. But there's going to be use cases where a smaller model can get the job done. And if we think about even a multi-agent world and multi-agent systems, you could have multiple agents accessing different sized models for different needs. And so I think as we talk about costs, leveraging those smaller models, the smaller models, they have less parameters, so they're going to consume less hardware. They're going to be cheaper to serve. You're going to be able to own them, so you won't be sending data to a third party anymore. You'll be owning them, owning the model. They're just going to cut down on cost. They're going to cut down on latency as well. Being smaller, there's just less computation to do, so you're going to get results even faster. And I think, especially as we build agentic systems that are doing complex tasks, so multiple steps that need to be done, those steps have to happen quickly. So we're going to want smaller models that can give us the function calls fast along the way.
One of the things that I believe it was Mark from OpenAI yesterday talked about this notion of system 1 and system 2 thinking, kind of this like think fast, think slow paradigm as well. That for certain tasks, right, you wouldn't expect a human to instantly just like regurgitate the answer. Like if I asked you like a puzzle question, you'd be like, oh, let me think about it, let me do some calculation here on the side, and then give you the response. Do you think that for a certain type of queries or goals that you throw to an agent, that maybe it might be more amenable to a, hey, I'm gonna let you go off do work for 10 minutes to an hour, next day I'll check back in on you, and what would those tasks even be?
I love this question. I was talking with a customer a couple days ago who has an agent, Zapier Central Assistant, that they use to help them plan their day. And it every day looks at their task list, it looks at their weekly and quarterly goals, it looks at their personal development goals and everything, and kind of like makes them a playlist for the day, basically, like this. And the instructions that they've written out for this agent, it's quite verbose. And at various points, I noticed she was like, take a break. Think about everything I've said so far. Then keep reading the instructions. And it's fascinating because she put that in because the agent performs better. That 10 millisecond break, that like the request to reflect and take time. It's really fascinating. You should all try that, by the way. Take a break. It's amazing. Who knew? I mean, when my manager tells me to take a break, I also perform much better. So I think there are little things like that that I expect to see us work more in, and I expect we're going to start seeing more and more system prompts include things like that as well. And these are still kind of emergent systems we're figuring out. But I think there's definitely a lot of space for giving your agents room and space and then coming back with information.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that the way I see it is if you have some small, very specific tasks, that is perfect for smaller models. It's perfect to give to a smaller model. Now, if there's something more complex that it really requires the power, of these big models, how they're just amazing at the reasoning. Something that's more complex, that is perfect for a big model. So I think as, in your agentic process, depending on the step, if the step is something short and sweet that you have a specifically small trained model for, it should go to the small model. But if something more ambiguous, more difficult to figure out, that is perfect for a large model.
Yeah, and there's no shortage of these models, right?
Yeah.
Big, medium, small. And
Yeah.
I think it's maybe causes a lot of decision paralysis among developers to be like,
Yeah.
I didn't catch up on Twitter for a week and I am completely like lost on what models to use.
There's so many.
That's one thing we've learned for sure is to invest in building a system that makes it easy to test new models and really easy to like swap something in, try it out, compare it to your evals, and play around. Because we're using many different models in the course of a system of agents that is all encompassed in each assistant that you make in Zapier Central, and each of those bits and each of those agents kind of works with its own model, and we swap them out and try them with different things and like maybe this one works better here and not better there, and like vice versa. So playing around with that and investing in making your system as you're building more composable, and it's almost like test-driven development, like model-driven development. Like ensure you can swap your model out.
Yeah, and let's actually talk about evaluations for a bit, because I think it's a really tough problem, and a lot of people, probably a lot of companies here have already shared their struggles with it, and maybe some tooling and solutions that they've come up with. But why is it in particular tough for agents to evaluate them?
Yeah, I think you probably have a lot to say. There's so many issues with it. But as you can imagine, again, like if we think about what type of data we need for evaluation for agents, we need data that has a task that ideally relevant to your business, relevant to your product. Maybe, again, what is the weather for today? That could be the task. And we need data that is the ground truth, that is the absolute truth on what the best actions to take are. There are so many gray areas there, right? Maybe there are multiple ways to execute that same task. Are all those ways valid for you? What happens if just one way is wrong, or if just one step is wrong? What issues do that cause? So one of the big challenges is actually getting a data set of that structure, getting a data set that has the task and actions. How do you generate such a data set? So really, that's a really tough question. So from our experience so far, we've been generating these data sets using a lot of open source environments. So whether maybe it's open source APIs, actually calling the open source APIs and creating these trajectories and creating a pipeline where we can evaluate, is this trajectory valid? Actually testing the APIs, testing the results, filtering out for hallucinations. Like as you synthetically generate these trajectories, whatever model you use to synthetically generate it could have hallucinated functions along the way. So I think, generating the right the right evaluation set and training data set is very challenging.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time, I wrote a lot of the first evals and just kind of like, what might people do in a workplace if they have Asana and Google Sheets and Gmail and they want to move information between? What might they want to know? And so coming up with the use cases that you're going to build your evals on top of it's just a lot of freaking work. It takes a lot of brain power. So it definitely, like early on, like it's a flywheel though, right? Like you build a small set, you launch a product. You get people to give you a feedback on what they're doing with the product, and you use that feedback to build the next set of evals, and then repeat, and then repeat, and then repeat, and then repeat, and eventually you have a giant class of evals. So right now, we have customers using the product every day, giving us thumbs up, thumbs down on when they gave instructions to their assistant. Did their assistant call the tools that it was supposed to? Did it do the actions it's supposed to? And did they draft that email? And then also, is the email any good? And so there's like you said, there's like each of those pieces, any of those pieces could be wrong, right? Yeah. And then people have set up systems with Central where, you give it a prompt and the agent is supposed to go to a web page, look at some data, compare it to a data source that you have attached, make a decision about if that's relevant or not, then create a JIRA ticket and have the right fields filled out in the right project. And it's like quite complex systems. And if one little part didn't work there, the whole thing's a thumbs down, right? So basically, investing really heavily in making it really easy for your users to give you that feedback, like really, really easy, because you need that so badly. And then investing in just the brute force categorization work of like looking at that and being like, okay, like why did this fail? This failed because it didn't resolve the parameters properly for the action. This one failed because it didn't call the right tool. This one failed because they didn't have the right auth, and it's actually, their fault, or they had ambiguous instructions, or, and then figure out what of all of the negative feedback is something that has something to do with the agent's decisions that you can then either adjust and then build a new eval against, or do you need to try a new model? Do you need, like, what else do you need to do?
Yeah.
But it's really about like having the confidence to get your product out there and ensuring that you're getting that feedback back to build those evals on top of.
Yeah, yeah. One topic that maybe among builders, we don't directly go straight to it all the time, but we should, is how do we build these sort of increasingly agentic autonomous systems more responsibly and like incorporate safety into them, especially if we want them to start doing things that could have access to very sensitive or private information.
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways to go about it. Of course, guardrails, like monitoring what's going into the LLM, what kind of asks, right? Whether is the customer or the user, are they asking to override the security system? Things like this, we may be able to catch before it even gets into the model. I also think, monitoring the output of the model as well. Same idea. And I also think that there's potential with fine-tuning. Another way we can kind of ingrain the model to, as it sees different, variations of, I guess, like target words that we need to be aware of, it will know to not produce any output or to produce some kind of boilerplate output.
Yeah. You asked about safety. There's a lot of different types of safety, right? Like there's the safety of our enterprise customers wanting to make sure that the data their agents have access to doesn't leak to other environments. And that's like, there are ways, there's like tried and true methods of siloing customers' data from each other, like do those things. That is like one category. Then there's safety of, will the agent do what I want it to do? Or is it going to go off the rails and like perform an action I don't want it to do? In the case of Zapier Central, we require the user to give an auth token, right, to be able to take an action, for the agent to take an action. And we ask for those auth tokens not app-wide, but action-wide. So like, do you want to give an auth token to create an email, or do you want to give an auth token to create a draft? I don't know why I keep using Gmail draft. I swear there are 7,000 different things you can do. But where you constrain the auth of what the agent can do is like another piece of safety. That doesn't answer your question of like, okay, and then once things are accurate enough and people are comfortable enough to actually take action, then then what? And then there's also kind of like multi-shot prompting, where you can train, like, one of the things we do is as people are thumbs up, thumbs downing, we're cycling that back into the system prompt of like, here are examples of when this went well, like follow that, follow that, follow that. Here's where it went poorly, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And so you can kind of like build in these iterative, and think about like training a high school intern, which is the metaphor I always use when you're working with LLMs. Like, it's a high school intern, they know nothing. Maybe they're like in some AP English classes. They talk real good, but they know nothing. And if you want them to do something, you got to tell them very specifically what you want them to do, and they're going to try it in like a pretty literal way. And then you're going to be like, oh, that's not what I meant. Common sense obviously means this other thing. And so when you can build systems so that people have to iterate through when they're working with their agent in the first place, and then that iteration and that feedback is baked back into the agent. So that's there's a lot of different things to think about with safety. There's also just like, can you break the system and find out everything that we've trained our models on? Like, yeah, probably. Like, you can probably do that. Does it matter? Probably not. You can't access any other customer's data. You can maybe reverse engineer what we've done, but like, good luck. There's a lot there. Yeah.
Well, we're wrapping up on time. I'm sure we could talk at length more on this topic, but just the last question is, over, under, are we talking more about agents this time next year or less?
I have a strong opinion.
Go ahead.
Okay, you don't talk about your clothes washing robot. You talk about your machine, your washing machine. And so I think agents right now is like a linguistic space of like magic, like, ooh, it's so cool. But like, as it becomes more and more reliable, I think agent is going to fall out of favor, and we're going to use like more mundane language. I do think assistant is going to be where we go for a lot of these things. That's I think, a more universally approachable language. Like we were like, should we call them agents or assistants? I'm like, well, agents is what this audience is calling them right now as we're building them. But as people are using them, they're calling them more often than not their assistants. And as they work, more often than not, they're going to be assistants. It's like when they like may work, may not work, that it's a robot or an agent.
Interesting.
That's a really interesting take. I'm super optimistic on where we're going to go with agents. I think from a builder's perspective, we have a lot of technical problems to solve, but I think we can do it. Like, I think we can do it. I think every week, every month, I see concrete progress to getting to a place where multi-agents can consistently work together. So yeah, I think in the next year, I'm really optimistic. I think we'll be talking more about multi-agents and agents working together to solve really complex tasks. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Shelby. Thank you, Anna Marie, for this very engaging discussion.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you guys. Thank you guys.
Thank you.